All right, so let's talk about Node.js session. Right, so oftentimes we need to have servers be able to remember things about particular folks, right? That as we interact with it, we need to, for Node.js to be able to distinguish, one person from another person, or one request from another request. By default, servers, HTTP, the HTTP protocol, right, doesn't have any mechanisms to distinguish one request from another, right? Oftentimes we say that the HTTP protocol is a stateless protocol, right? There's nothing in the request, right, that uniquely identifies anyone from someone else. To be able to support, right, the differentiation between one user and another user, we need to have an infrastructure that allows us to have unique identifiers for every request. Yes. So to do that, we're going to use a module called the Node Session module. The Node Session module will allow the server, the Node server, to be able to distinguish one request from another. What we'd like to be able to do is that, if I interact with the server and I ask for my weather, right, and then you ask for your weather. Ideally, we have different weather. You're somewhere else geographically in somewhere else, in some different place, and maybe you can remember next time I come around, right, that it's still me. It's still my weather, right? And ideally, I would tell you that it's my zip code only once, and then somehow you remember this, going forward, that it's the same zip code, and it's a different zip code from someone else. Yes. Now, there's two ways of maintaining state, right? It could be that the client maintains state, right, and it just keeps sending, the zip code over and over and over, right, without the need of the server to remember anything, right? This is the ideal. This is what ideally you would do, right? Instead of burdening the one server having to remember everybody's zip code, you can distribute this instead and delegate this to each client. Each client can maintain their own state, right? And they provide the zip code every time they query, right? That way the server is not burdened having to remember that your zip code is 12345 and your zip code is 545678, right? We usually say that servers that are stateless are usually considered to be more scalable, right? That they require less of a footprint, right? They don't have to maintain, if they have to remember everybody's zip code after having thousands of folks that are continuously talking to it, right? It would need to maintain a memory space for every single session that it's talking to. Yes. So obviously it'll have a much bigger footprint. Instead, if every client maintained their own state, there won't be any need for the server to do so, and there's no need for it to remember anything between anyone else, right? It is the client who remembers these. Make sense? Nevertheless, sometimes we cannot delegate session information or state information to the client. There's certain things that we don't want to delegate. For instance, identity. Right? If I log in, right, and I want to tell you who I am with my username and password, usually I wouldn't want my password to leave the server, right? That is not something that we would want to send out to the client, on the clear or through HTTP, and ideally that would stay only on the server, right? In that case, the only way is to maintain state on the server, right? That we have to remember. We'll map your identity to some token. Right, and then I'll send that token over and to the client, and then the client, as long as the client keeps sending me the same token, I'll know that it's the same person. Make sense? Right? So there is a standard to do this, the standard of these tokens and whatnot that map to session, and it's a cookie standard. Right? It's cookies have been around forever. Right? And it's a contract between the client and the server. In that the client agrees to keep sending the server a token that the server generated. Right? The server, what the server does is that whenever for a new request, it checks to see if that request has a token, right? And says if it has a token, it says, "Ooh, maybe I know you." Right? It checks. Typically, the tokens are also time stamped and have an expiration date. And says, well, if it hasn't expired yet, then it must be good. And then I can use that token to then map it to some local variable and say, oh, it's still you. Yes? Makes sense? So it's the same mechanism that we used way back when in HTTP session, identical. It's the same identical mechanism. In that case, we were using the HTTP session API. Here, we're going to be using the node session API. But the underlying mechanism is the same, right? Cookies mapped to variables, and there's one variable memory space per cookie, right? And the mapping of the cookie and the memory space is automatic. Yes? Right? So for one cookie, the cookie is used as a key into this map, and then by the time you get the session, that mapping has been done for you already. Make sense? Right, that's transparent to the API. So anyway, so let's make use of this. We'll install the library. The library is called Express Session. Express Session. So let's install it. Let's see, are we in the right place? We are. We're going to paste it. We're going to download it, install it, and you'll notice that package.json now has the Express Session library installed. Right? That means that when you push it to Heroku, it'll install that library as well on Heroku. Okay. All right. So it did that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to configure. We need to configure the session. All right. So this is just the same hello world example we saw earlier. There it is. So what we're going to do is that we're going to load that brand new package we just installed. There it is. So let's do that. In our server, there's our server. Our server's right here. And so we're going to load the session. There it is. Express session. And then we need to configure it. Right? So one of the things that, this session can be configured, again, using the app.use. That means that every request that goes into the server is going to be intercepted by the session. Right? It's going to be intercepted by the session. It's also going to be intercepted by body parser. It's going to be intercepted by the course. Right? They're all going to be, before it gets to you, any of your gets or posts or puts or deletes is going to go through all of these filters, right? All of these middle tiers, right? Before it ever gets to your gets or posts or puts. Make sense? By the time you get it, right, it has already mapped, if there was any body, has already been parsed, right? If there were any cookies, they've already been handled by the session, right? If if this was coming from some other domain other than this domain, all right, course has already been decided that 4200 is okay, right? So that's why you're getting it. Otherwise, you wouldn't even get it. Okay, right? So here's the configuration. One of the configuration is this secret at the bottom. See that? That secret. That secret is used to sign the cookie, right? To encode the cookie so that no one else could read this cookie. So what the cookie that's going to go back to the server is going to be gibberish, right? It's not going to have any readable text on it, right? Only the server will be able to make sense out of it, right? Because it knows this secret. Right? It will use the secret to encode the cookie so that it's secure, right? So that even if we send it over to the client, it'll be meaningless to anyone, right? Only when the cookie is sent back to the server will be able to know what the original cookie was. Make sense? Right? This secret can be any text. It can be any text as long as it's same text. Right? And typically you would not make it available in source code. Here is available in clear text as part of the source code. Typically it'll be part of like an environment variable, right? Or either at your IDE level, right? Or it will be as part of your operating system as an environment variable that can be read as a process environment variable and then fed into here. But typically it would not be part of a string, literal string like this. Anyway, so let's copy that, and then there it is. So we're configuring the session. All right, so now we have the session configured. Let's play around with it a little bit. Let's create a little service that allows us to send some values and see that it can remember us, right? That it can remember data that we send it, right? Right now, there's no way for it to remember anything. Well, unless it stores it in local variables. But then it will be the same variable for every request, right? Regardless of who you are. Right? What we want to be able to do is that you'll have your session, and you'll have your session, and I'll have my session, and each one of us will have our own version of the values. Okay? All right. So let's create a couple of endpoints. Let's put it in a separate service here. So let's create here a state or session service.server on the server side. We'll create a service, a node module. This will be module.exports function, and this will be app, and then we'll copy these in there. There they are. Okay. And then so these are the mappings of the URLs, and then the functions that implement them. Okay, we don't have them here. Let's implement it with using set session. So set session. Here's set session. So what set session is going to do is going to want to read the name and the value, right? So what we're going to be doing is that it's going to say, API session, I'm going to set some variable equal to some value. Like for instance, zip code 01234. Yes? From one browser. If I hit it from some other browser and I say set the zip code to 56789, right? Each browser should have their own specific session. So that if I later come back and I say get my zip code, one of the browsers will say 012345, right? Whereas the other one will say 6789110. That's not a valid zip code. Anyway, each one will have their own session. That's the whole point, right? That each one of us will have its own session. If I'm logged in, it's me. If you're logged in, it's you. Everyone has their own session. Yes? So let's play around with that. So the way it works, the way we're going to do is that we're going to parse out the name. We're going to parse out the value, right? And then we're just going to use the session. This session, notice that it's request.session. See that? That session object was not there originally. Just like body was not there originally before we put the body parser, right? Body was undefined. Body parser added the body in there as it parsed the JSON and then it made it available as part of the request. Session, express session is going to do the same thing. It's going to parse the cookie, right? It's going to instantiate the session for us in memory. For every cookie, it's going to have a different session. Right? It's going to maintain that mapping for us. We're not going to see any of that, right? Instead, it's going to give us a session variable attached to the request, okay? And this session instance is already mapped off of the cookie, right? So if it's you with your session accessing this, it'll be your session object. If it's someone else with a different cookie, it'll be their session object. Make sense? Okay? And the session object is a map, right? That will allow us to put any variable with any value, right? It'll be a hash code. It'll be like a hash map, right? I can put anything I want in there. Right? It could be a string with another string. I could put a whole object in there. I can put whatever I want. The bigger the object, the more memory I'm asking for. Yes? Well, the more memory I'm asking the server to remember about me. Okay? Once I put it in the session, I can then later on at some later point come back and ask for that variable that I put in that session for my session. And you can ask for yours, and everybody can ask for theirs. Right? And everyone will have a different value for a particular session. Okay? Also notice that I am sending back the session object. I'm sending it back. I want to look at it from the client. Okay? All right. So let's try it out. Set session. I don't have get session. I'm going to comment these out because otherwise it's going to complain. Also, I need to actually pass this app. Right, so let's go into server. Let's load our session. We're going to require our brand new service. So services, session service. I'm going to pass in the app. Okay. Okay. So let's run the server. There it is. It's up and running. So let's hit it. So let's so this is the API session set. I'm going to set my zip code, right, to 12345. Right. I send it over, and now it comes back saying, okay, this is what I have for you in the session, in the map of the session. Any configurations that you might have done for the cookie. How many, before it times out. I can configure that. We didn't configure it. Also notice that I stored a zip in there. If it's some other browser, maybe for using Safari, and using the same query, but instead of my zip code is 67890, notice that my zip here is 67890, right? You see that? So it's different for each one of us. Notice that this session doesn't know anything about somebody else's session. Each one has its own distinct session, right? And it uses the cookie to be able to determine whose session am I giving to who, right? Also, I guess I should have. Oh, I don't have it here. Full and in network, right? Let's send something else. My area code, maybe area code. Right, so it's 321. So I send that. Notice that I have both my area code in there and my zip code are still in there, right? In there. And if I look at this, look at the headers, right? Notice the cookie here. See that? That cookie, right? It was generated by the server, by my Node.js server. Generated that cookie, right? And the browser is agreeing that from now on, every time I send you a request, I will send you that cookie again. Right? I will send it to you so that you on the server side can realize that it's still me. Right? It's still me. Right? And the whole session infrastructure can look at that use that cookie to look up your session and then pass it to you in your request that session, so that it's your map. Right? If I go through Safari, I would have a different cookie, right? A different value for that cookie. Okay. All right. So we have that. As long as the server is running, this cookie will be alive. Also, it doesn't have a timeout. So by default, I believe it's like 30 minutes. The cookie will still be good after 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, the server will consider that cookie no good. Right? And so you'll get a brand new session, right, with any data that you might have put in there. It will be lost. Right? If you keep hitting it with the same cookie, the counter will restart. Well, restart a new count of 30 minutes, right? So that as long as there's activity, right, the cookie will be good and it won't time out. All right, so let's implement some other couple things here. Implement the get session and implement it from, let's see, get session. There it is. And implement it right here. There's get session. So get session uses the same, gets a value, gets the parameter of the name, right? What do I want? You want the zip code? What do you want? You want the area code? Whatever you stored in there, you want to retrieve it, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to notice here, right? It says, so I can set the zip code to some value, and at a later time, I can come back and say, hey, you know that value I stored over there? Give it back to me, right? So I can say get, and then the zip code or whatever, right? So I'm getting the whatever you want zip code, and then I'm getting it from the session. So I can write to the session, or I can read from the session. Yes? Right? This case, I'm reading from the session and then sending back the value. So I'm going to restart the server. And so now if I go back here and make this small here and see my Safari, so I'm going to set the area code from my Chrome. So I'm setting the area code to 321, and over here I'm going to also set the area code right to 432. Okay, there it is, 432. And then I can retrieve it. I can say get instead, right? I'm going to say get the area code. Right, it comes back with 321, which is correct. Whereas over here, I can retrieve the area code. It comes back with 432. Right, so the server can distinguish that we're two separate sessions, right, with two different folks, and it can treat us differently, and remember things. It can remember a dialogue. And where this most is useful is, for instance, when we log in. Right, when we log in, implementing registration, profile, right, all this information should live only on the server and never expose any of that information on the client. Right, you want to remember these things on the server. So let's do that. Let's use what we just learned to implement login, registration, profile, and things like that. Let's do that.